Hi, my name's Mike, and I want to share with you a project I did at my house to deal with a drainage issue in my backyard. I live in a northern climate, and as you can see in the backyard, every spring I get large puddles back along the fence there. So there's one large area where water collects and it's low-lying. Yeah, I've tried just adding soil to it and it just moves it around. So after watching a whole lot of videos, I'll put links to some of those in the notes, I came up with this design. So that area where you saw the water puddling, I decided just to sacrifice it, if you will. Make that a collection area for the water, a drainage pond, if you will, and just fill it with stone. So that way, it won't be a pond that animals or kids could jump into and potentially drown. It's just an area with rock that's going to get saturated. Then naturally the water wants to collect, so I'll let it collect there. Going left to right, I decided to put a French drain to try and give that water in the yard a place to flow into that drainage area. Then I would bury two flow wells. So I'll show you a picture of what they are. Maybe you've already seen videos on flow wells. It's just a large underground barrel for water to collect. Off of the garage, the gutter I'm going to have flow into the flow well on the right. The French drain would go into the flow well on the left. The two would be connected. And there would also be a sump basin tied into this so that if I ever did want to drop a sump pump or a utility pump in there to pull all the water out of the system, out of that drainage area, that would allow me to do that. I'll show you pictures of what this all looked like. Here's a visual shopping list, if you will. So I had two of those flow wells. I chose to use the optional drain at the top of them. So I had to purchase that separately. It was surprisingly expensive, those things, compared to the flow well itself. A sump basin with a cover that screws on to the top. The 4-inch corrugated drain pipe, I wound up using about 50 feet of it. The non-woven geotextile fabric, and when you hear that term, you may have come across other videos talking about this. It's not just landscaping fabric. It's not weed barrier. It's a specific fabric that you can buy online. I didn't really ever find it in stores. Maybe it is available, but I wound up buying it online. Then the two basins, one for the end of the French drain and one halfway in the middle of it. And then tile tape, which is what you use to connect it all together. So you can see I've laid out the space where I wanted that half circle and the two flow wells to go. The one on the left is only about halfway into the ground, so I didn't take any video of me actually doing the digging. My hands were too dirty and I was just a miserable person having to deal with all this slop at the time, so didn't really feel like taking my camera out and shooting video of it. For information on how to install the flow well and how to wrap that fabric around it and then apply the stone around it, look on the NDS YouTube channel. I'll put a link to that video as well. Get the advice directly from them. And you can see off to the left, that's where the French drain runs to try and pull that water from further into the yard, give it a place to flow into that one flow well. And right on cue, one of my dogs come into the scene. That's Bentley. She's the one who tends to get the dirtiest and tracks in mud. So this is a picture of the project further into it. So the two flow wells have been buried. The drains attached to the top of them are poking out of the ground, and those will be covered with rock. I used landscaping bricks around the perimeter just to give it a defined shape and to hold in the stones that I'm going to drop in there, and then covered it all with that non-woven geotextile fabric. You have to use staples, spikes if you will, to keep the fabric in place. Those you purchase with the fabric. So if you've come across this video, no doubt you've heard of French Drain Man. I highly recommend his videos. Go ahead and watch it. He'll talk about how to do a French drain better than I can. He'll talk to you about the burrito wrap, which is what I used. And I'm sure if he were to come out and look at my project, he'd probably punch me in the face because it is a half-assed job. I fully admit that, but I'm just hoping it gets me by and avoids too many muddy paws and makes my backyard a little bit nicer place. The landscaping supply company I chose to work with near me that delivers stone, they had different types of stone to deal with. Some of it was smaller. I went with what's they called 1.5 to 4 inch cobblestone. It was pretty affordable, reasonably affordable, I guess, for the amount of rock that I actually got. I had to calculate how much I needed and used the advice they had on their website. Now, they told me that a ton is equal a yard. Most of the stuff I'd seen online, people were talking about how many yards you need. This place, they deliver it by the ton, but they said that the two are about equivalent. I'll let you decide or get advice from wherever you get your stone. So doing the calculation, it was a 10-foot radius for that half circle. 2 pi r would be a full circle, so just pi r would be a half circle. It's 31 square feet. If I get a yard, that would cover 50 square feet at 2 inches. So I figure 1 yard or 1 ton would cover that half circle about maybe 3 inches. Then I forget where I came across this information. It may have been on the NDS website. They recommended a little more than a cubic yard of stone per flow well. So at a minimum, it would be 2 cubic yards, maybe 2.5 if you wanted to go a little bit more. And then for the French drain, some other advice I'd seen, they stated it in cubic feet. I converted it to cubic yards. So if you take for every foot of French drain times 0.025, so I had about 20 feet. That's about half a cubic yard of stone you need. When you add it up, it was about 1 plus 2 plus a half, 3.5. I rounded it up to 4 because I wanted to, have all that stone in there, as much stone as I can to hold the water in place. So I decided to get 4 cubic yards of stone. If you want to know what 4 cubic yards of stone looks like, there it is. I put down boards underneath it. You can't see it there. Boards and a tarp, just so that when the stones were dropped into my driveway, it didn't crack the driveway. Again, I had looked at some information online. Most people saying it shouldn't be a problem. Other people had some skepticism about whether or not it would damage a concrete driveway. So I put some boards down, at least maybe to absorb the shock of all that stone hitting the surface. So here's what it looks like afterwards, after a couple weeks of some grass growing in. You can see in front of the collection area, I actually raised up that area, added some soil to it because I wanted to prevent water from getting into the driveway. So it's a little bit higher now. It keeps the water and it flows into that collection area better. While the grass was growing and I had seed down, we had one of those tremendous summer storms that just inundated the area with water. Some of the grass seed wound up flowing into the stone, so it's starting to grow out of the stone. I don't know if I'm just going to let it do that, pull it, or just try to chemically get rid of it. But anyway, so that's why if you see some grass seed growing out of the stone, that's how that happened. That sump basin is a collection point where I could use a utility pump if necessary. And I've had to do this once this summer where, again, it collected all in that one area, which is great, but it started to flow into the yard. So I just drop that utility pump on that surface, on the cover, plug it in, and I pump it out with a hose all the way out to the street. If I take off the top and drop it into the basin, it takes the water down even further. I did have a plan for a phase 2, if you will, where rather than using that utility pump periodically and dragging out an extension cord and making sure the extension cord doesn't lay in the water, I would put a outlet on the garage, bury PVC pipe, conduit for electrical from the garage to that basin, then put a sump pump in there. Every spring, put it in there, and then every fall, take it back out, and have a discharge pipe going all the way from the backyard to the street. And I think if I hired a professional, that's what they would probably recommend. it would be a much bigger project. I did call the utility company to flag out and mark anything. There was nothing in this back area. I'm sure if I did run a pipe all the way from the backyard to the front, there'd be a lot of utility lines I'd have to look out for. I hope you found this video useful. So far, I am happy with the results.